Welcome everyone to the Monday edition of our Packers News live chat alongside Ryan Wood. I am Olivia Reiner. It has been over a week since the Packers NFC Championship loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we have a lot to catch up with all of you on. It has been a very long time. There has been changes at both the defensive coordinator position and the special teams coordinator position, plus a lot of other words and things to say, especially following General Manager Brian Gutekunst and head coach Matt LaFleur's press conferences today. We will get you up to speed on all of that. Plus, before we get into that, though, as a reminder, it has been a little while. So, of course, if you're new here, welcome. If you're not new here, you know the drill. We want you to be a part of the conversation. If you're over on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube, leave us a comment down in the chat. Ryan and I can see all of your thoughts. We know you have them. We want to hear from you, so we'll get to some of your thoughts toward the end of our conversation today. The Packers parted ways with defensive coordinator Mike Pettine following their NFC Championship loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Pettine's contract expired at the end of the season, so the Packers made the decision to let him go into the wild and find a new job. Now, head coach Matt LaFleur is going to have an opportunity for the very first time to hire his own defensive coordinator. Pettine was a holdover from head coach Mike McCarthy's tenure back when he was head coach. What steps does LaFleur want the defense to take under the new defensive coordinator of the future?
He said something very interesting today. It's not necessarily how the plays are called, but how you play the plays that are called. So kind of a mentality and a mindset type thing, an aggression that he's looking for out of this defense. And if you look at the way the Packers defense was under Mike Pettine, in a lot of ways, very passive and not just to be passive for passive sake, but there was a purpose there. But Mike Pettine would tout it throughout the season how they didn't give up many explosive plays, and that was very forefront in Mike Pettine's defensive philosophy. Make the offense earn what they get. Don't give it up. Don't get beat deep. Now, you saw in the NFC Championship game that didn't go exactly very well. But as a whole, that's the way Mike Pettine approached defense. And so you saw a lot of off coverage instead of press coverage. And over the course of the season, a couple times you saw Matt LaFleur request more aggressive play, more press coverage, more of those sort of things. And he went into a pretty long diatribe today about how you don't want to just give things easy, even if it's underneath. And so I think that's going to be a mentality shift that you see with how the Packers play defense, something that Matt LaFleur wants. And, as far as scheme fit, Brian Gutekunst said that he feels like he's got a really versatile cast of personnel on the defensive side that can fit into just about any defensive scheme. If you look at it, they have a lot of versatile players. So the scheme it's not secondary. It's going to be important, but really it's more of a mentality and approach to how to play defense on that side of the ball more than the plays that are called.
Matt LaFleur is well underway in the search for the next defensive coordinator. Let's take a look at just a small sampling of what we know who those defensive coordinator candidates are. Right here, ESPN has reported that the Packers have interviewed or are in the process of will interview 3 different candidates in Joe Barry, Chris Harris, and Ejiro Evero. And then Tom Silverstein, our Packers News reporter, he reported that the Packers have expressed interest in potentially interviewing Chris Richard, the former Seahawks defensive coordinator and Cowboys passing game coordinator. And additionally, LaFleur himself said that the Packers are going to be interviewing at least one internal candidate for the defensive coordinator position. He did not specify which candidate that would be. Ryan, when you take a look at this list of candidates, plus the candidate that we don't know about, what are your major takeaways?
I think the first thing that jumps out to me is that Matt LaFleur, if that's who he's interested in, he's not committed to hiring a guy that he's worked with before. He's looking at a pretty expansive search there. Some of those guys, obviously, he has worked with before in his past, but not everyone. And as far as the internal candidate, he didn't say who it would be, but Jerry Gray makes a lot of sense, the defensive backs coach that Matt LaFleur hired before the 2020 season. Jerry Gray, first and foremost, a guy that's renowned for his teaching. You look at the job he did with Jair Alexander this past season, kind of helping him elevate his game to that second-team All-Pro status. And then he's a guy that with the Titans and with the Bills has been a defense coordinator in his past. So if you look at really just a really wide net that Matt LaFleur is casting, that's only a small sample size too. Matt LaFleur said that he's talked to a lot of people today. He he certainly is. It looks like he's casting an expansive search.
It's not just the defensive coordinator that the Packers are looking for a new role, a new person to fill those shoes. They're also going to be looking for a new special teams coordinator after they parted ways with former special teams coordinator Sean Menenga. Matt LaFleur has already decided to promote Maurice Drayton, who was formerly an assistant with the team, to this new special teams coordinator role. The Packers special teams have struggled mightily over the past 2 seasons, and a longtime NFL journalist Rick Gosselin recently, he every year will rank each special teams unit for each team in the NFL. And this year, the 2020 season, the Packers came in at a whopping 29th ranking out of 32 teams. How likely is it that someone like Drayton, who was essentially, he was working under Menenga, how likely is it that Drayton can bring new and fresh ideas to this special teams unit?
Yeah, so I'll just be honest. One of the unfortunate things about the way that this season was covered on Zoom is that there's so many questions you don't get to ask. One of those that would have been great to ask Brian Gutekunst today was, from an evaluation standpoint, the personnel on special teams. I don't see a lot of explosiveness in terms of personnel at the bottom of this roster. They fill it with guys who are undrafted guys. They fill, and that's something that goes back to Ted Thompson. They fill it with guys that are kind of fringe roster guys. They always want to make the bottom of the roster as good as possible. But that bottom of the roster is your special teams. So it would have been really interesting to see if Brian Gutekunst believes he needs to scout and draft and kind of put more stock into special teams from a personnel standpoint. I will say from a schematic standpoint, just because Maurice Drayton was Sean Menenga's assistant doesn't mean that he's Sean Menenga. And there can be vast differences in terms of the personality of an assistant coach or the personality of a coordinator, how they implement things. I think if you look at it on paper, it's easy to fall into the habit of, well, he's just going to be more of the same. Not necessarily the case. So from a schematic standpoint, I would pause before you expect Maurice Drayton to be Sean Menenga or be similar in scheme. But again, I go back to the personnel. I think that from a personnel standpoint, I just don't see a lot of explosiveness on the special teams. Where's the dynamic returner for the past several years? I mean, since Micah Hyde, have they had a guy that can take one to the house? They really haven't. So until that changes, I don't know how much is actually going to change on special teams.
Let's take a look at one of the key takeaways from today's press conferences. Just about a week ago, quarterback Aaron Rodgers said that there is no absolutes regarding his future. Today, general manager Brian Gutekunst had a very different message re Rodgers and his future in Green Bay. Gutekunst said that he has absolutely no intention of trading Aaron Rodgers this season. Plus, he also was pretty optimistic about the Rodgers and his upcoming years in Green Bay, not just the 2021 season. How likely is it that the Packers still want to restructure Rodgers' contract to give him a little bit more guaranteed money heading into these next couple of seasons?
Brian Gutekunst gave no indication of whether or not he'd be willing to do that, but it's kind of just common sense because this is a team that is very much looking to get under the declining salary cap, something that Brian Gutekunst did acknowledge today. And one way to do that is by adding more proration in terms of more guaranteed money to Aaron Rodgers' contract to divide that out, to spread that out more evenly over the years, the last 3 years of his deal. I would expect that to get done. I think when it comes down to it, the big question is not whether or not there is more guaranteed money. Right now, there's none on the remaining life of Rodgers' contract. The real question is whether they guarantee all the way through 2023 or if they leave that last year not guaranteed and just go through 2022. It would be pretty stunning if they didn't do something, though, because it helps the team. It's a common sense move for the team. If they're going to put the words, as they did today, behind Aaron Rodgers, there's deeper commitments that they can make that would help them out as well. So, this is a team, no surprise. They're not moving on from Aaron Rodgers in 2021. I think that the interesting thing today is that they said and beyond. Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst both committed to beyond 2021. And that kind of jives against the grain of what Aaron Rodgers said with his uncertain future. That's hardly – they left very little uncertain. So, I think it's going to be interesting to see moving forward. We're talking, Olivia, with the decision for Matt LaFleur to kick the field goal for 2 years, Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur have cultivated this type of trust, this relationship. They would scoff at the idea that there's any strife between them. It's easy when you're going 13-3 and going to the NFC Championship game. This is their first real disagreement on a big stage now. Aaron Rodgers made it very clear. He wanted a fourth down. He wanted the ball in his hands. Matt LaFleur said that he liked that. He said that he liked that Aaron Rodgers felt that way. He wouldn't want a quarterback who didn't feel that way. With that said, you took the ball out of your MVP's hands. That's not easy to move on from. Matt LaFleur said that he doesn't think that he needs to mend a relationship there, but over time, I think that'll be interesting to watch.
What are your thoughts out there, Packers fans? What do you think about the whole situation? Rodgers, his future here in Green Bay. We want to hear you down in the comments. Let's head over to some of the comments right now. Let's start with Pack number 1 over on YouTube. They say, if Rodgers is indeed the Packers' future for the next few years, what does that say about rookie quarterback? I guess he's not technically a rookie anymore. Second-year quarterback Jordan Love. Could he be a trade bait if Rodgers continues to play at an elite level? Today, Brian Gutekunst absolutely doubled down on the fact that Aaron Rodgers is the Packers quarterback now and for the foreseeable future. However, he said that he has no regrets about the 2020 draft and the fact that the Packers selected a quarterback in the first round in Jordan Love. How does one reconcile those conflicting sentiments that Gutekunst has?
It's very simple. We know nothing about Jordan Love. We won't know anything about Jordan Love for 2 years. And I mean anything. We will know nothing about Jordan Love for a good 2 years. And that would put him 3 years after draft. It's the same timeline that they used with Aaron Rodgers. Brian Gutekunst said today that, yes, it is against the norm in the league for them to sit quarterbacks, for anyone to sit a quarterback, especially a first-round quarterback, for a long time. And yet he very much believes in that. That's core to his philosophy. And he even said today that it's probably not the last developmental quarterback that he's going to draft. Now, it's different because, when the Packers were drafting developmental quarterbacks under Ron Wolf, they were using the back of the draft to do that, not trading up in the first round. So this is a different thing. With that said, we don't know. Jordan Love could be Jimmy Garoppolo. This could be a New England Patriots situation. The possibility has always existed for that to be the case. Going back to the night he was drafted, if Aaron Rodgers was to go on a Tom Brady-type tear, win MVPs, keep this team in contention, get back to the Super Bowl, it was always very much possible that Jordan Love was never going to play a meaningful down, be the next heir apparent for Aaron Rodgers. If not, he could be. So we really don't know. And for everyone and it's a lot of people on my Twitter timeline that think, well, the fact that they took this first-round pick on Jordan Love, it's a terrible pick. It didn't help him this year. It might not be a terrible pick. If he keeps his team in contention the next decade to 15 years, it's a great pick. We don't know that yet. And until we do, it's really hard to make any determinations as to the validity of that pick and what Jordan Love's future is going to be here, especially with Aaron Rodgers playing the way he is.
We've been saying the same thing since draft night. Patience is a virtue. It's going to take some time, so patience, everyone. Thank you so much, Pack One. We appreciate your question. Let's go over to Facebook now for a question from Mike. Mike wants to know if we can give him our thoughts on the odds on the following players returning to Green Bay in 2021. We'll start here. They list running back Aaron Jones, center Corey Linsley, and outside linebacker Preston Smith. Let's start with Aaron Jones, who becomes a free agent in March at the start of the new league year. How likely is it that the Packers want to bring back and are successful in bringing back Aaron Jones this upcoming season?
It's almost flip a coin there. There's things they can do. It wouldn't shock me if they tried to tag him. Brian Gutekunst said today, point blank, he would love to have Aaron Jones back. And that's an acknowledgement of what Aaron Jones means to the offense. He is a big part of this offense. This offense without Aaron Jones is a substantially lesser offense. So it's not fantasy football. You can't have everyone. There is a cap, but I would, it's going to be hard. That's why I only put it at 50-50, but I'd put it at 50-50 that Aaron Jones is back and that they're going to want to retain him and do everything in their power to make that happen, as difficult as it will be, because he is a difference maker on that offense.
And then moving on to Corey Linsley, you look at the Packers draft in 2020, they selected 3 interior offensive linemen, plus they have someone like guard Elton Jenkins, who's capable of playing center. We've seen him do that this season. How likely is it that Linsley is extended this year?
I'd say it's unlikely, and that's more of a byproduct of the depth that they have on their interior offensive line than is anything about Corey Linsley. Corey Linsley is a first-team All-Pro center. He's going to get paid a lot of money. And when you have depth and you have really difficult decisions to make, you're unlikely to be willing to fork over that money because you got to put it elsewhere. Maybe Aaron Jones, maybe elsewhere. Corey Linsley said after the season, the day after the season, there have been no substantive talks between him and the Packers. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but at this late stage, it definitely seems unlikely that he'll be back.
And then looking at Preston Smith, his deal, he is now heading into what could potentially be the third year in a four-year deal in 2021. His cap hit in 2021 is $16 million. How likely is it that the Packers would want to restructure that, move on from Preston Smith in order to save a little money in a year where the cap is projected to be over $20 million less than anticipated due to the coronavirus pandemic?
And that's the key point, right? Like if the declining cap wasn't a thing, and Brian Gutekunst said it's going to be a unique situation because he's never encountered in his entire career a declining cap. It does not happen in the NFL. As he said, you don't plan for a pandemic. There's no way to know that that's going to happen. If not for that, it's very likely that Preston Smith's going to be back. It's a no-brainer. It's obvious. This is where we get into the guessing game of where the cap casualties are going to come from. It's possible that Preston Smith is a cap casualty because it's possible that just about anybody is a cap casualty. That's the reality the Packers and many teams around the league are in. At the end of the day, I'll still say it's likely that Preston Smith returns because he is a big part of the defense. He turned it on in the second half of the season quite a bit. They don't have any depth, even with Preston Smith at outside linebacker. It's just I'm going to say it's likely that he'll be back.
Thank you so much, Mike, for your question. Brian wants to know, what are the Packers doing with Kevin King? The cornerback becomes a free agent in 2021 as well. He was injured periodically throughout the year. There was a span of games this season where he missed 5. He was dealing with injuries all the way up to the very last game, the NFC Championship game, where he was listed as questionable heading into the game with a back injury. Where do the Packers stand with Kevin King currently as they look to evaluate whether or not they want to keep their pending free agents next season?
It would not surprise me if he's back, and don't freak out, Packers fans. I'm not saying that that's going to even require all that much commitment from the team. Kevin King, in a lot of ways, cratered his market this entire season, not just in the NFC Championship game, but go back to 19. He played 15 games. He had 5 interceptions. He had the type of year, stayed healthy, and was productive that he'd always knew that he could have, and the type of year that he needed to duplicate in 2020 to have the market that he expected. And he didn't come close to duplicating that. He only played 11 games, no interceptions. And then the NFC Championship game happened. And you add to the fact that, again, it's a declining cap. Where's he going to go out and get a lot of money? I don't see that. I don't see that possibility there. The big picture, though, it's not so much about Kevin King. Whether or not Kevin King returns or not, cornerback very well might be their biggest offseason need because behind Jair Alexander, who can you trust at corner for this team? Jair Alexander was a first-round pick a couple years ago. Josh Jackson was a second-round pick in that same draft, and he's a healthy scratch. You can say bust, but I think healthy scratch is a better way to put it. Josh Jackson is a healthy scratch on this roster right now. Kevin King got torched on the biggest stage, and Shannon Sullivan was picked on by Tom Brady as your slot corner. Behind Jair Alexander, they're in the same position that they've been in for a decade now. They need to continue to put assets into their cornerback position. So whether or not they have Kevin King back, which I think is possible, it doesn't change the fact that they need to put a lot more into the cornerback group again, just like they have for the past several years.
Let's continue with that conversation. Billy over on Facebook says that the Packers ought to draft a corner, a receiver, and trade Jordan Love. Ryan, it's a little bit early to start talking about the draft. I know that we have some work to do regarding looking at where are the strengths in this year's draft, so we'll get to that at a later date. However, when it comes to offseason additions, whether it's through free agency or in the draft, where are the Packers' biggest needs?
I think corner is 1A, and I think defensive line is 1B. I think there needs to be more than Kenny Clark on the interior for this defense to really take that next level. Kenny Clark, you saw in the playoffs, he's finally healthy, had his rhythm back. He's a dynamic player. On the edge, they've got enough pass rush. But what do the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have? When they're healthy last year, what do the San Francisco 49ers have? What do the Los Angeles Rams maybe not have? They have Aaron Donald, but they didn't show much more on the interior. So you have Aaron Donald hurt like he was for the divisional game. It's a big drop off in that defensive front. There's depth there. They come at you in waves on the interior. The Packers have Kenny Clark. They need more there. And that's the reason I think that late in the season you saw Brian Gutekunst add Snacks Harrison. The best defensive fronts in the league have more than one guy on the interior, and this Packers defensive front needs to add to that to take the next step as a defense.
Thank you, Billy, for your question. Let's go over to Keith on Facebook. Keith wants to know if the cap this upcoming season will affect the quality of football in 2021. As we mentioned earlier in our show, the cap is projected to be anywhere between $175 million and $180 million, which is about $20 million less than anticipated. Typically, year to year, the cap increases. Every team is going to be in the same position. How are teams going to try to keep some of their expensive players, given the fact that the cap is going down?
It'll affect the salaries more than the quality of play, because these guys are still going to find jobs. It's just not going to be as well-paying jobs as they would like. I mean, it's like any other job in a recession, and that's what this is for the NFL. It's a receding cap. There's a job out there. It's just doesn't pay the same, right? So I don't know if it's going to affect the quality so much. It's definitely going to have a big impact on salaries, which is why you look at a Kevin King. You say, well, maybe he's back, because who else is going to pay him, right? And it's not all about Kevin King in that situation. Who else is going to pay a guy? Like, that's every team in the league, with the very few exceptions, are in that same boat, and the money's going to be a lot thinner to go around.
Thank you so much, Keith, for your question. Let's take a question from Steve over on Facebook. Steve wants to know what the status of wide receiver Devin Funchess is. Funchess perhaps is forgotten in all of this. He took an opt-out earlier before the season started due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So that means that his one-year contract that he signed way before the start of the season, it tolls a year. So he is still under contract with the Packers. However, the Packers could decide to release him if they see fit. What is likely to happen with Funchess?
Could be a cap casualty. Matt LaFleur was very, very effusive in his praise for MVS today, and why wouldn't he be? MVS had the bounce back year that he needed to have, and you look at what he did in the NFC Championship game, and the biggest thing about what he did in the NFC Championship game, his hands look so smooth and natural. You hadn't seen that at all earlier in his career, so that's a real sign of development there. Allen Lazard, maybe they draft again. I think that Devin Funchess is a prime example of a potential cap casualty.
Thank you, Steve, so much. Thank all of you so much for all of your wonderful questions. Ryan and I appreciate it. We will be back in the coming weeks to continue to have these conversations as we approach free agency, the draft, the virtual combine, whatever that's going to look like this year. We will keep you all in the loop, especially over on PackersNews.com. Make sure you're checking out all of our coverage over there. Plus, make sure you're following us on all of our social media platforms to stay updated. We'll want to check back in with you as soon as the Packers make their defensive coordinator hire. So again, make sure you're checking us out all over the place on all of the platforms. For Ryan Wood, I am Olivia Reiner. We will see you next time.